The supernatural suspense story comes to a close when Amy and Vic hatch a plan to snuff out the demonic fireman for good. We're going to talk about it right here in our review of Charred Remains number 6 from Mad Cave Studios. See you in 3. Welcome back to Comical Opinions. This is our review of Charred Remains number 6. Before we get started, let's take less than 60 seconds to recap what happened in issue number 5. Amy and Vic found themselves at the same place at the same time by different paths for different reasons. Vic was taken by his chief of the fire station to the underground cavern where the fireman and his cult congregate. And he said, this is what's going to get rid of your nightmares. You have to become one with us. We have to join our cult, and the fireman will keep you warm. He'll keep you happy. He'll keep you safe. And all you have to do is basically surrender yourself to the flame. Vic thinks he's crazy, but there we go. In a completely different part of the cavern, Amy is brought before Mr. LeFew, who is Patricia LeFew's father, who is the head of Hope's House charity. And he says, look, you've been digging into the wrong places, you've been doing all the wrong things, but we can let all that slide. And if you just let this go, and in exchange, if you join with the cult and become one with the fireman's flame, we can put you back in touch with your family who were consumed by the flame when you were a small girl. She also thinks everyone is crazy and decides to make a break for it. And as Vic is running and Amy is running, they run into each other and they both skedaddle right out of the cavern where the cult is holed up. And as they're out in the open air and running through the rain because a hurricane is now coming in the direction, they encounter an ambulance which is driven by Patricia LeFew. And that's where we end the issue. Okay, that recap was a little bit more than 60 seconds, but it was important context. So that brings us to issue number 6. Patricia gives Vic and Amy a little bit of a safe space inside the ambulance, and then she lays it all out. She gives you all this expositional dialogue to say, here's what's happening. The fireman and his cult, they have been kept alive for many, many years. And even though you think I am in league with my father, I'm not. Secretly, I have been working behind the scenes to try and sabotage my father because he uses Hope's House as a money-making, power-grabbing scheme to bring followers and fuel to the firemen while profiting off of their misfortune at the same time. So even though I'm aware of the cult and I know what my father's place in it, I'm not with him, and I've been trying to destroy what they're trying to accomplish. Vic and Amy aren't quite sure if Patricia's on the level, but they decide to go with it. And Patricia says, I have a plan that's going to stop all of this, and it's going to destroy the fireman and the cult once and for all. The canal that you see in the nearby area is situated directly over the cavern where the cult meets and where the fireman is located. I have a plan. We're going to go in, we, meaning myself and Amy, are going to go into the cavern, and then we're going to set down this case of blood. And in this story, if it wasn't obvious, and it really wasn't that obvious, the fireman's specific mystical kind of flame reacts explosively with blood. It feeds on it. So when you have a lot of blood, it can become explosive. So we're going to blow up one of the exit caverns that could potentially give them an out. And then Vic, you take the ambulance, which has even more blood in it, you crash it into the spillway for the canal, blow it up with this blood using the candle from the flame, and then that's going to seal it off and redirect all the water into the cabin, and we're going to snuff them all out. To make this plan work, however, they need one of the special candles that contains the fireman's flame because it's that kind of flame that ignites the blood. Vic returns to a spot from a previous issue where he hid one of the last candles he found from a previous fire at the pumping stations. Unfortunately, the candle's gone. He says, okay, well, I know where there's one other candle, but nobody's going to like it. So he goes back to his fire station and he finds the chief there. And several of his fireman buddies are there, but they're dead. And the fireman is willing to set fire to the whole place himself and everything else as an offering to his, for lack of a better term, God. A fight ensues, breaks out. They eventually get the candle away from the chief of the fire station, but everyone dies in the process. And Vic and Amy escape with the candle, but with a lot of dead bodies behind them. Now it's time to put the plan in action. Amy and Patricia go down into the entrance of the cavern carrying a case of blood, but it's in a sort of a generic or innocuous case, so hopefully nobody suspects what's going on. Outside, Vic drives the ambulance with a large supply of blood directly to the canal, and he tries to crash it into the spillway to block off the water flow, so that way when they unleash the water, it'll go down into the cavern instead of right over the cavern and off to a safe dumping off point. Of course, plans don't always go as they intended to. Vic is successful. He crashes the ambulance into the spillway and he lays out all the blood, and he basically sets up a nice explosive booby trap, but he has trouble lighting the candle and getting it to ignite the blood. Inside, Patricia takes Amy to her father, kind of like a ruse or just a red herring to say, look, I brought Amy to you. I want to come back to the cult. She wants to become a member of the cult, kind of get everybody feeling relaxed and comfortable, so that gives Amy a time to sneak off and plant the blood to turn it into effectively a bomb. But the father isn't believing it. And then he tries to get the cult to turn on his daughter. The daughter says, hey, why are you turning on me when you should be going after my father? Because if you think about it, he's the only one that hasn't committed himself to the flame, and he's the only one that's profiting off of everything that you're doing when everybody else is weak and poor and miserable and everything else that's going on. And so that turns into a big melee where the cult then turns on both Patricia and her father. But that does give Amy a little bit of a window of opportunity to plant the blood for the explosion that's going to seal off the exit. Back outside, Vic eventually has to cut himself to give the entire thing fresh blood and to feed into the candle, and that gets it to ignite the rest of the blood in the ambulance, and poof, boom, it all goes up, which seals off the spillway and gives the water a path to flow. Inside, the blood bomb that Amy planted does blow up, and in the chaos, Patricia's burning, her father's burning, everyone's burning, and that gives Amy a chance to run out and escape through their original exit, while the congregants of the cult try and come together to protect their, for lack of a better term, God. And you see this big fiery conflagration. Ooh, say that 5 times fast. But the water starts spilling in and snuffs them all out. But it may not be over just yet. That's how the issue ends, and that's how the miniseries ends. Let's move over to the technical aspects, starting with the character work. So Anthony Cleveland, who's the writer, gives you an action-packed finale. So there's a lot of energy, a lot of things are happening very quickly, a lot of urgency, frantic actions that are taking place. However, we do get some, I would say, at least 2 important bits of character information and development. Vic and Amy have a brief moment before they kick off their plan to kind of acknowledge that they're now not mistrusting each other, that they respect each other, and that they want each other to be safe. So there's a moment of care. It doesn't turn anything into anything more than that, but you see that they sort of bonded a little bit because they now have a shared goal and are coming from places of, for lack of a better term, shared trauma. Second, Patricia LeFew has probably the biggest character change, because when she drives up with the ambulance and takes them in from the beginning of the issue, or actually the end of the last issue into this issue, she gives you this big exposition dump that explains that she's kind of been a secret hero this entire time, working behind the scenes to destroy the fireman and his cult system from within. Let's move over to talk about the art and the presentation. We have been, I would say, fairly high and positive on Andrea Mutti's art, both in this series and also in a history of, or I should say, a legacy of violence, also from Mad Cave Studios. Mutti's watercolor, kind of loose, impressionistic style looks great for horror, especially in the looks of shock and fear that it come across on the characters' faces. However, sometimes that watercolory, loose style can get away from you, and that happened in this case. The big climactic battle, conflict, whatever you want to call it, has a lot of things that are happening very quickly, and there are several panels where that loose style loses so much detail that you don't really know what's going on. There were a couple of panels where we looked at it and didn't know what we were looking at. Loose and vague and impressionistic is fine to a point, but you can't lose clarity, and that happened a few times here. Let's move over to pacing and structure. To pull off a finale that's this action packed and that moves this well, you need a sense of urgency, and Cleveland pulls that off. The pacing is high on every scene. The scenes are just long enough to do what they need to do without overstaying their welcome. There's no lingering, and the dialogue is kept to a minimum, except for the exposition dump from Patricia LeFew, which we'll talk about in a minute. In other words, it feels like a quick read. A lot happens very quickly. You get that urgent pacing. So on that count, it works. Structurally, the conclusion makes sense as far as the plan, how they attack it, how they intend to put this demon down, and the entire process behind it. That all works from a conceptual perspective. The one piece that felt like he's either shortcut or cut short or just didn't get developed well enough was Patricia LeFew and her entire scenario regarding Hope's house and how she's been working behind the scenes. Because throughout the entirety of this miniseries, you only saw her pop up once or twice, and you only got the vague sense that something fishy was going on with Hope's house, but you never really got that full story, or at least it never came across on the page. So when she suddenly appears out of nowhere and says, "Oh, by the way, I'm a good guy, and here's all the stuff that's been happening that you never saw," that feels forced, and it feels like it didn't really develop. So you could get the impression that Cleveland put it in there because he wanted to develop it into a bigger story, and either didn't have enough time or didn't pace it properly. Along plot pacing is what I'm talking about here, and it fell through the cracks, and so he had to do this big expedition dump at the end to make it make sense, and so it doesn't really make sense. Let's quickly move over to talk about themes. In a nutshell, it's good versus evil for the sake of justice. There's really nothing much more complicated or deep than that. Yeah, we're talking about New Orleans, and New Orleans has had its troubles in recent years, especially when it comes to impacts from hurricanes and what that means for the people of that city economically, and corruption and politics and all that kind of sort of stuff. But really, this is just a basic story of good versus evil within that particular setting, and that's about it. Final thoughts. What do we think about Charred Remains number 6? The supernatural miniseries comes to a close with lots of action, high urgency, a few nail-biting moments. Yep, when they're racing to kind of get to the goal, and I would say a reasonably satisfying conclusion. That said, the Hope's house mystery with Patricia LeFew really gets explained away without a lot of development, and it felt like a rush just to kind of get it all in. And the art loses clarity in spots, which is not great when you have a super stylized art style or hyper stylized art style. You can't lose clarity for the sake of style. That's just a no-no. Therefore, we're going to give Charred Remains number 6 from Mad Cave Studios a 6.8 out of 10. Hope you enjoyed this review. But before you go, let us know what you think. Do you like these types of supernatural thrillers? Do you want us to review more of these types of stories? Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed the review, thought it was helpful, and leave a comment to let us know whether we should or should not be reviewing more horror stories of this sort. We want to hear your opinion about that. Thank you very much for joining, and please stay tuned for the outro for the next review.